History meets fantasy in this epic retelling of Sengoku period conflicts, now combined with Japanese mythology. Nioh 2 is now on PC. Developed by Team Ninja, the masterminds behind Ninja Gaiden, this is a fresh new entry into the Souls-like genre that puts a fresh unique spin into the combat side of things. While you can expect to see other Souls-like elements such as the exploration, the RPG, and punishing difficulty, the combat is really where this game sets itself apart from the others in the genre. It's rather complex, with a lot of moving pieces, and provides a rather high skill ceiling for those who wish to master its demanding nature. In many ways, I would describe this as a Souls-like fighting game. Not only are there fun and crazy combos, but there's even some skill expression that allows you to personalize your playstyle. This complex nature of the combat can make getting into the game a little difficult and overwhelming. The opening tutorial is unfortunately somewhat basic. It's a ton of text dumping that just tells you what things are and a little bit about what they do. Unfortunately, knowing about a topic and actually understanding that topic are completely different things, and the game just kind of throws you into the thick of things after a huge expedition dump. Now, there is a training dojo that you can access at the start of the game if you want to go in and practice and lab some stuff out. A little more about that later in the video. But for the most part, the game just kind of leaves you to your own devices. Now, this is something that a lot of Souls-like players tend to prefer, but the combat for this game has so many moving parts that I really think Team Ninja could maybe just have held your hand just a little bit longer, maybe a dinner after the movie. Therefore, I wanted to make this video to give you something a little bit more comprehensive so that you can come out looking like this. This video is going to be broken up into two major sections, the combat section, which will be the longest, and an RPG/skill customization section. If it was not obvious, down below are timestamps for each topic, so if you're interested in a particular one, you can go down there and click on it. But without further ado, I'm Rakamdar, gaming content creator and your sensei for today's video, presenting the comprehensive beginner's guide to Nioh 2. We're going to go ahead and begin with combat. This will be the largest section of the two as we discuss many of the core mechanics in the game. Our first task at hand is picking a weapon to suit our playstyle. This selection will happen at the start of the game, but there are actually no restrictions to what weapons you can wield or anything of that nature, so you can immediately start to practice each one and try to get a feel for which one you might like the best. Keeping to the fighting game analogy, this is going to be like your main in, say, Smash Bros. Or Street Fighter. While eventually you'll have enough of an understanding to really play every weapon, for the most part you'll want to prioritize a single one that you can just really grind out and master. For me, I chose the fists, and they're the ones that just click with me the most. And while you might notice a lot of spear gameplay, it was actually quite difficult for me early on to kind of come to grips with, and there's lots and lots of me messing up. For a newer player, I think that figuring out one, maybe two weapons that you can just kind of focus on is going to be really beneficial to you in the long run. Every single weapon in this game is viable, and there are several builds around them, so you can really fine-tune your own personal playstyle. And you also don't have to feel too restricted by your build. There's many ways to respec in this game, and they're rather easy to come by. I will say that you should prioritize your active skills over the passive skills in your skill tree. The active skills are the yellow ones that add additional moves to your weapon's moveset. The blue passive nodes, they can be pretty useful, but I personally think it's more important to unlock your weapon's full potential so that you can start to practice some of the advanced combos. With your weapon of choice selected, let's talk gameplay. Nioh 2 has two core mechanics that really shake up the way you would expect to play a game like this. The first is the stance mechanic, and the second is the key pulse mechanic. Beginning with stances, you have 3 of them. In order to switch between them, you have to hold the R1 button and then press the respective face button. R1 triangle, R1 square, and R1X for high, mid, and low stance respectively. Each stance has their own unique moveset and a couple of additional properties. Low stance is quick and evasive. It has the faster moveset and it has the best dodging properties. Mid stance is going to be your balance stance. This has fast and slow moves, but it also has the best properties for blocking. High stance is going to be your heavy hitter. Doesn't necessarily mean your attacks will be slow, but your dodging and defensive capabilities will be hindered in favor of a more offensive moveset. High stance in particular will not have your attacks deflected if the enemy is blocking. Now, in terms of active skills for each stance, each one will have a unique set of them assigned to it from the skill tree. As you're browsing through the skills, you may have noticed that some of them say high stance only or low mid stance only. These ones can only be assigned to that specific stance. Now, it may be tempting to assign your favorite skills to all the stances, but I would encourage you not to assign the same skill twice, of course if it can be avoided, and practice switching between them. If you start to get used to a single stance, that's completely fine, but it's really beneficial in the long run if you can start to get comfortable moving between them fluidly. This may take a little practice at first, but eventually it'll become second nature and you'll start floating through combos like a martial arts master. With the stance switching out of the way, let's move on to the key pulse. The key pulse is a mechanic rather unique to Nioh, where you can press the R1 button in a timely manner in order to actually regain the stamina that you just consumed. You may notice after a sequence of attacks that the stamina meter will start to glow white. If you press R1 at any point in this time, you'll activate the key pulse and regenerate some stamina back. If you time this perfectly as the meter fills up to the end, you'll do a perfect key pulse and regenerate all of the stamina that you just consumed. Additionally, during this time, there will be little blue particles surrounding your character that also give you another hint as to the timing of this perfect key pulse. Here, you wait until all of the particles converge on your character, and that will be the timing for the perfect key pulse. The key pulse mechanic will be the single most important technique for you to practice and master in this entire game. Once you master key pulsing, you'll essentially have a pseudo-infinite stamina bar. If you're seeking a very aggressive playstyle, this will be essential to achieving that. However, the key pulse has a variety of applications outside of its stamina regen properties. Many weapons will actually extend the abilities of the key pulse within their active skills. For example, inside of the fist skill tree, there's an active skill that will turn your perfect key pulses into another attack, allowing for incredible follow-up potential and combo ability with this weapon. One of the main reasons it's my favorite. Aside from specific weapon examples, the key pulse is also crucial when dealing with yokai enemies. After a yokai enemy does a major attack, you may notice that there's a kind of black and white aura that stays lingering on the ground. This is known as a yokai realm, and if you stand on top of it, it actually hinders your stamina quite a lot. In order to get rid of this yokai realm, you have to perform a perfect key pulse. Now, while this is a really core technique that can require a lot of practice to really get used to, there are a couple of other things in the skill tree that actually make this even better and easier to use. These skills of mention are located in the samurai skill tree. If we open that up, we have 5 specific skill nodes that we are aiming for. The first set of skill nodes are the running water skill nodes. These can be found directly bottom, directly to the left, and directly to the top. These will be gated off by an initial skill node first, so you'll need 2 points in order to get each one. What each of these running water skill nodes essentially does is they allow your dodge to function as a key pulse. I don't really think I need to go into much detail as to why these are incredibly powerful. Getting some stamina back while simultaneously dodging, that's just a match made in heaven, honestly. Well, not quite as simple, the other 2 skill nodes also add a ton of power to the key pulse mechanic. These 2 nodes can be found all the way to the right of the skill tree and are called Flux and Flux 2. These 2 skills enable you to regain more stamina every time you switch stances during a key pulse. It may sound a little confusing, but it's actually rather simple. Since the key pulse mechanic and the stance switching mechanic both use the R1 button, all you really gotta do is press R1 and the corresponding stance at the same time as you would do a normal key pulse. Admittedly, this one will take a little bit longer to get used to, but once you do, that pseudo-infinite stamina becomes even more infinite. With just these 2 techniques, the game really starts to noticeably differentiate itself from what you may come to expect from Souls-like combat, venturing even further into the fighting game analogy. This becomes even further emphasized by, well, being half demon. This newly added feature of the sequel brings a whole new dynamic to the game. Being half demon / yokai, which is called a Shiftling, kind of expected more from that name, not sure why. Anyway, it gives us a lot of new abilities that we can now take advantage of. One of the strongest new abilities that is really crucial to the flow of the game is the burst counter. This move is activated by pressing R2 and circle. There are 3 different types of burst counter depending on which yokai form you have selected. The 3 forms are Brute, Feral, and Phantom. Some attacks that the enemies can execute will have a red aura around them, and that indicates that they can be burst countered. With proper timing of your burst counter, you can now interrupt that powerful attack, dealing a significant amount of key damage and a little bit of damage along the way. The Brute transformation is, well, it's a brute. It's big and powerful, with a burst counter that packs a punch. The Brute's burst counter is actually a little bit different than the other 2 in that you want to activate it before the attack goes off. In that sense, this burst counter is a true interruption. The Feral transformation is light and nimble, and boasts a burst counter that actually acts as a dodge. For this reason, it's probably the most popular out of the 3. In order to interrupt a burst counterable attack with this one, you must actually time the dodge so that it connects with the attack. In other words, it's basically a parry. The Phantom transformation is bulky and defensive. This burst counter actually functions like a block and will defend against oncoming attacks. Similar to the Feral transformation, in order to interrupt a burst counterable move, you have to time it properly with the oncoming attack. It's also a parry. However, if you miss the burst counter timing, the defensive properties of the Phantom's burst counter will still kick in to block the attack, preventing any damage. This makes the Phantom a pretty solid option for practicing your burst counter timings. This is something I greatly encourage you to do. Similar to key pulsing, this is a huge aspect of this game. Pretty much every enemy you come across will have at least one move that you can burst counter. Interrupting them is much more effective than just trying to dodge them. Additionally, the burst counter can be used at any time during any animation. Essentially, it's an animation cancel. This is perfect if the enemy attempts a burst move while you're in an animation. Even if you're wailing on them left and right, you could still go for the burst counter to get that interruption. Plus, if you're using the Feral transformation, you can use the dodge property to get out of laggy animations in case they attack you with something that's not burst counterable. This makes you a lot less vulnerable if you're going in for a big heavy attack combo. Unfortunately, the transformation that you will have is based on what Guardian Spirit you have equipped. Therefore, if you get a new spirit that you really like, you will have to adapt to a new transformation. Being half yokai, we can also absorb the souls of fallen enemies in order to use their powers for ourselves. If you've ever played Castlevania Aria of Sorrow or Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, it's not too dissimilar from that. Basically, when you defeat an enemy, there is a chance that they will drop their soul core. After picking the soul core up, you must now take it to a shrine in order to purify it. Any unpurified soul cores do actually drop on death, so you gotta be pretty careful if you got a lot of these stored up. After you've made it to a shrine with these soul cores, they will be permanently added to the collection, so you no longer have to worry about losing them. At the shrine, you can now assign these collected soul cores to a particular guardian spirit and use them in battle. These new active abilities will be a new attack based off of the yokai from which you have obtained the soul core. Basically, you're now Mega Man. You can use your enemy's attacks against them. In order to use them, it will require some anima, which is the third gauge in the top left. This gauge builds up over time as you deal damage to enemies, so you'll likely have quite a lot of it. Therefore, don't be too conservative with these skills. These are really powerful and can really turn the tide of battle. All too often, I'll watch new players and they'll have a completely full anima gauge, not even touching their yokai skills. The yokai blood running through our veins also gives us the ability to activate the Yokai Shifft. This powerful ability is activated by pressing triangle and circle at the same time. Upon pressing this button combination, you now begin to transform into the yokai form that you have selected. This transformation is incredibly powerful, but it is also the most restricted. In order to actually use it, you have to have a full Amrita gauge. In the top, to the left of your HP bar, you may notice that there is a guardian spirit icon, and it is kind of slowly filling up. This is the Amrita gauge, and it continues to fill up as you collect, well, Amrita. Once it fills up, you are now free to activate the yokai transformation. While you're in this form, you have an entirely unique moveset dependent on whichever form that you currently have. Pretty much every one of them does an insane amount of damage, and the best part is you actually can't die while you're in this form. You may notice that the gauges in the top left have completely changed into this new single gauge. This gauge will slowly deplete the more you do stuff in this form, or if you take damage. Once the gauge is gone, you'll revert back to your human form. Therefore, you're completely immortal, as long as you're not running off cliffs. Now, the Amrita gauge does charge a little slowly, so you might be tempted to kind of save this and conserve it until you need it for a big moment. But what if I told you there was a way to bypass that? You see, as you run around the level, you might notice you're picking up these things called Amrita crystals. These function like the poppable souls from Dark Souls. Essentially, you pop them to gain a specific amount of Amrita. At first, you might be tempted to hold on to these until you are at a shrine and need a level up, but what if I just told you that these are your free Yokai Shifft transformation crystals? Essentially, just a handful of even the smallest crystals can completely fill your Amrita gauge, giving you free access to the Yokai Shifft. Since the smaller size crystals don't give that much anyway, I recommend just holding onto them so you have unlimited access to your Yokai Shifft. Finally, one last piece of advice is to block more often. Now, I know this sounds pretty simple, but it's a really basic tool that you can take advantage of that I feel like a lot of people overlook when they're starting to play this game. It's kind of understandable, the Souls-like genre tends to condition you to dodging more so than blocking, but I highly recommend that you try to break that habit and use the block in this game. It will greatly help you out in your play. Almost every single attack can be blocked, you just gotta keep an eye out for certain burst attacks and grabs. For grabs, there's a telegraph of a black and white aura around the attack before it goes off, so you can easily discern between that and normal attacks. Now, blocking will consume ki as you might expect, and there is going to be an animation if you get hit while having very little of it. If you block a hit like this, you will be put into a downwinded state where you'll be vulnerable to several attacks. Humanoid enemies can come in and execute a grapple move, which is a fancy, flashy combo that will likely one-shot you. And of course, you'll be vulnerable to yokai attacks that will probably also deal a lot of damage. Even still, it's a very powerful tool, and I highly recommend you get a feel for the execution of the block. Besides, if you recall from the burst counter discussion, you can actually use the burst counter during animations, which, yes, includes the winded one. This can help you avoid the harsh punishment of messing up a block. With everything we just discussed, there is quite a lot here, from remembering combo sequences to strict timing windows for moves. Therefore, don't ever feel bad about going into the game's training dojo to lap some stuff out. Whether you just picked up some cool new skills and you really want to see how they work, or if you just really want to go in and practice a combo sequence, there's a ton of tools in the dojo for you to truly get a feel for how things operate. And that will finally conclude the combat section. While there was certainly a ton of stuff to talk about with the game's combat, it's still an action RPG after all. For this section, I'm going to be showing off some priority skills in the skill tree, going over optimal stat point allocation, briefly discussing gear and the blacksmith stuff, and finally highlighting some cool synergy effects that you might find useful as a newer player. Without wasting any time, let's go ahead and talk about skills. Now in the combat section, I already discussed the key pulsing skills that you can use to make key pulsing stronger and a little easier, so I would obviously recommend picking those up. If we move over to the Shiftling tree, we can find a couple of nodes here that are really helpful in our adventures. These two nodes are located here, and basically they make the negative effects of the yokai and dark realms much less prevalent. Dark realms are essentially a big yokai realm, where instead of a small circle on the ground, it's now just an entire area. As you can imagine, these Shiftling skill nodes will greatly help whenever it comes to navigating these spaces. There's a lot of useful nodes in this skill tree, so I recommend reading through them. Some skill nodes will make your Yokai Shift transformation stronger and last longer, so those are pretty nice. And one of my favorite nodes that you can get later in the game allows you to heal every time a soul core gets collected. It's pretty useful, and it helps preserve elixirs. Moving on from Shiftling skill stuff, I want to urge you to take a really close look at the Magic and Ninjutsu trees. Both of these have a wide variety of really powerful tools that you can really use to help make the game much smoother. Unlike other Souls-like games, it doesn't require you to put a ton of points into those Magic and Ninjutsu stats in order to wield effectively. Every build will have these at their disposal and really should try to take advantage of them. The Nioh Magic tree focuses mostly on buffing yourself and debuffing enemies, while the Ninjutsu tree focuses on utility tools and offensive projectile weaponry. With regard to Nioh Magic, even bosses are affected by your debuffs. This is important because most RPGs like this don't really let you do that. You can focus on poison or paralysis or slowing down your enemies, but usually bosses are immune to that kind of stuff. Not in Nioh 2. Therefore, make sure you're taking full advantage of all the debuffs that you can stack on your enemies. The game actually kind of encourages this. It wants you to just debuff, debuff, debuff. For the Ninjutsu tree, there are a wide variety of options here, but I highly recommend picking up some of the projectile weaponry. This can help you in a variety of ways, from luring single enemies, or just dealing some extra damage from afar. Now, the Ninjutsu and Magic will not be available to you until you reach Main Mission 2. Here you'll find the first instance of Nioh Mage Locks and Ninja Locks. Essentially, you eat the hare, My Hero Academia style, in order to gain skill points for that tree. While consuming Ninja and Mage Locks is one of the primary ways of obtaining skill points, you can actually build proficiency for both of them just like you would a weapon. Basically, you just gotta keep using them and you'll gain proficiency. I will mention that while all of the items will build proficiency, the ones that deal a lot more damage tend to give you more than the others. Most of the tools in both trees are pretty solid and have their uses, so just kind of jump in and experiment and have some fun. Now, I could go further in depth into the Magic and Ninjutsu, but honestly that's beyond the scope of this video. My goal here is to instead highlight the importance of these trees so that you might be encouraged to investigate them further. Perhaps I could throw together a dedicated video to Nioh Magic and Ninjutsu. If that's something that you might be interested, let me know down in the comments. And while you're navigating down for that comment, might as well hit the like button along the way. It really helps out the channel and I greatly appreciate it. And of course the subscribe button's right down there next to it, and it's free, so might as well. Anyway, that's enough of the shameless YouTube stuff. Let's go ahead and move on and talk about the stats. Like many RPGs of this kind, there is a stat page, and as you level up, you will have to choose which ones you want to increase. Each stat is tied to a variety of different things, and each one will also give you a damage increase on particular weapons. Now at first you might be tempted to just put all of your points into a single damage stat in order to increase your damage with your main weapon, but I urge you not to do that. When it comes to Nioh 2, you actually want to take a more equilateral approach and equalize all the stats to around 30. This is because the Guardian Spirits and armor sets actually require a set amount of stats in order to wield their special effects. By putting all of your stats to 30, you guarantee that you can wield any armor set and Guardian Spirit in the entire game. Now, once you hit 30, you can start to figure out which one you want to prioritize, but that starts to hit the realms of endgame and Nioh, which I'm not familiar enough with. And being a beginner's guide, I don't think I need to really talk about it. Now, leading up to the 30 stat equalization, you can focus on a couple of stats here and there, depending on what armor sets you want to use or Guardian Spirits you want to use. Basically, I just don't want you to be putting like 50 points into dexterity simply because you use the Kasuragama. That's not something you want to do in this game. My friend would simply just put 10 points into everything and then go down the line. 1 point into Constitution, 1 point into Heart, 1 Courage, rinse and repeat until he eventually has 30 in everything. Whichever ends up working for you, the main takeaway being that equalization. Now that you have the stats to wield all the gear in the game, let's go ahead and talk about gear. Basically, the main thing here is to make sure you're actually just keeping your gear up to date and to prioritize the exotic gear when you get the chance. Basically, the rarity determines the amount of special effects attached to it, so the exotic gear will give you the most power. Now, I will let you know that there are rarities higher than exotic, but that's not until you reach New Game Plus, so you don't have to really worry about that. Aside from that, just kind of pay attention to what type of special effects are on your gear, and just kind of make sure that you're keeping them related to your current build and playstyle. I will let you know that at the blacksmith there is a way to temper your gear which allows you to change its special effects. This does cost a special resource and some money, so you can't do it infinitely, but it is a good option if you have some crappy effects on your gear that you want to get rid of. There's not a super broken effect that I could point out to you, it's just based on what kind of synergies you want to set up with your gear and Guardian Spirits. There's also some gear that are parts of sets, and I would recommend trying to take advantage of those because usually the effects there are really powerful. Just make sure you're not putting on too much weight when it comes to your armor if you're trying to do this. If you're trying to equip a piece of armor, you can go to the top to see the effect it has on your equipment weight. I had to pause there at the end of that last line because I just kept saying equipment weight in my recording. Oh my gosh. Anyway, this has a ton of effects, and if you've played any Souls game, you kind of get an idea on where it's going to go from here. The less equipment weight you have, the more nimble you'll be. The main goal here is to avoid going above 70%, that basically turns you into a moving rock, but there's still some added effects if you go below 30%. The length of your dodge is actually affected here, so the lower your equip load, the further your dodge will be. Additionally, stamina consumption on everything, not just dodges, will be affected by your equip load. Therefore, having a lower equip load does mean you get more attack, so there's some nice benefits there. But I will let you know that armor is pretty effective in this game, so you just kind of have to figure out which one you'd rather have. A more aggressive, dodge-focused, nimble playstyle, or a tankier, I can take some hits playstyle. There's merits to both of them. Now with gear out of the way, let's finish off by just briefly mentioning some Guardian Spirit stuff. At first, the Guardian Spirit may not seem crucial, but if you take the chance to truly abuse the special effects it can have, you can easily make this game a lot smoother. This can also combine with some of the abilities the Soul Cores will have as well, to lead to some pretty unique and interesting synergies that will allow you to just pump out the damage. Early on, you actually have access to a pretty powerful poison build, so I'm going to kind of show it off here real quick before I wrap things up. This is a great example of the types of things that you can do if you truly take advantage of all the different synergies that the game allows. There's a huge variety of possibilities here, so just kind of pick something that sounds interesting and go experiment. Alright, so that's going to wrap pretty much everything up, but there are a few things that I would like to mention here towards the end of the video. Basically, I wanted to kind of bring to light some of the settings in the options menu that may or may not help you throughout your play. The first setting that we could change is whether or not you want to consume locks of hair automatically upon picking them up. This is just a nice quality of life change for people like myself who tend to forget to use them from their inventory. Next, we can go into the display settings so that our HP key and anima numbers are displayed next to their respective gauges. Additionally, the cost of your soul core abilities can also be displayed next to their icon. As they say, knowledge is power. Next, if you're running out of equipment space in your equipment tabs, the bottom left-hand corner items, you can actually change that as well. By default, it's set to only give you 2 equipment tabs, but you can upgrade that to 4 if you desire. And finally, are you tired of that ugly helmet covering up your cute waifu's face? Well, stress no further, you can actually turn that off. Anyway, that's about it, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the video. Now, I know there's quite a lot here, and it can definitely feel overwhelming, but don't feel like you need to master it all immediately. Even as I was looking stuff up and doing research for this video, I was learning new stuff myself. The game is just so dense and chock full of systems and moving pieces that you're always going to be learning something new each time that you play the game. If I happen to miss anything important, please let me know down in the comments below. I feel like I managed to get everything, but there's so much stuff in this game that I'm always second guessing myself here. Now, my goal for the video isn't to explain all of the inner workings, but instead to give a set of fundamentals so that the viewer themselves feels confident going in and will have the tools necessary to progress. It is then up to you to continue your training as you progress through the game and ultimately surpass your sensei.